Naira Elowen had 3 nights left before she became property, and the emerald collar around her throat felt like a noose tightening with every heartbeat. 3 nights until Lord Valar Hask, the man whose last wife simply vanished, whose household staff moved like ghosts, too terrified to cast shadows, claimed her as his. Her uncle had sold her with the casual efficiency of a merchant tallying grain. No cruelty in his voice, just polite inevitability that made her skin crawl. She was a commodity. Valuable enough to secure alliances, expendable enough to trade. He'd raised her for this, trained her to smile through discomfort, to endure rather than choose, to understand that survival meant obedience and nothing more. She'd believed him for 22 years. But survival wasn't living. And Lord Valar's house wasn't survival. It was slow death dressed in silk and false courtesy. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother once said I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this, the quiet ones, the forbidden ones, the ones that burn slowly in the dark, deserve to be heard. Subscribe to Midnight Stories and help turn whispered tales into something that can't be ignored. Comment below what time and where you are watching from, now. Let's continue. So Naira wrapped everything she owned into black velvet, gold coins hidden over years, her mother's rings, her father's signet brooch, and slipped through the servants' passage into the night. The night market sprawled at the city's edge where law dissolved into shadow and desperation, where men sold loyalty and weapons and silence and sometimes themselves, where marriage was just another transaction if you had the coin. She pushed through the crowd, hood drawn low, pulse hammering in her throat, firelight-painted faces in shades of amber and rust. Wolves howled somewhere beyond the torchlight, their calls answered by others deeper in the forest. The air smelled of smoke and sweat and something wild she couldn't name. She'd passed 3 mercenaries offering blades for hire, 2 merchants selling false papers, 1 woman whispering promises of poison that left no trace. Everything had a price here. Loyalty, violence, bodies. Why not marriage? Her fingers tightened around the velvet pouch as she searched the crowd for someone, anyone who looked strong enough to protect her, but desperate enough to take her gold and ask no questions. Someone who'd sign a contract and disappear. Someone who'd give her a name that wasn't Valar's. And then she saw him. He stood apart from the press of bodies, stillness radiating from him like cold from stone. Scarred forearms crossed over his chest. Eyes that caught the firelight and held it. Too bright, too aware, predator bright in a way that made her hindbrain scream warnings. Men moved around him without realizing they were giving him space. Guards positioned at the market's edge watched him, like men watched storms. He didn't belong to this crowd. He didn't belong to anything. Every instinct Naira possessed screamed at her to turn back, to find someone else, to choose literally anyone who didn't look like violence waiting for permission. But 3 nights. 3 nights until she belonged to a man who broke things slowly. 3 nights until the emerald collar became a chain she'd never escape. Wolves called again from the forest edge, closer now, their howls threading through the smoke-thick air. No one else seemed to notice, except him. He tracked the sound with an ease that made her steps falter, head tilting slightly as if listening to something the crowd couldn't hear. Up close, he was devastating in a way that had nothing to do with beauty. Scars carved pale lines through the bronze of his forearms. His stillness wasn't relaxation. It was control, the kind that came from knowing exactly how much damage you could do and choosing not to. People stepped aside without looking at him. 2 men in dark leather watched from the shadows, hands resting on weapons, eyes tracking his every movement with the wariness of soldiers guarding something dangerous. Naira's heart hammered against her ribs. Some ancient part of her brain, the part that remembered when humans were prey, begged her to run. But she'd come too far, risked too much. 3 nights wasn't enough time to find another option. She stepped forward. Naira stopped 3 feet forward, close enough to be heard over the noise. I need a husband. His gaze shifted to her. slowly. The weight of it was physical. Not a lover, she continued, voice steadier than her hands. Not a protector. Just a name on a contract. I have gold. Enough to make it worth your time. He said nothing, didn't move, just studied her with an intensity that stripped away pretense, testing something deeper than resolve. She felt exposed beneath that stare, as if he could see the desperation coiled in her chest, the 3-night countdown etched into her bones. I'm not asking for affection, Naira pressed, or devotion, just a legal bond. You don't touch me. I don't interfere with your life. The marriage exists on paper, nothing more. Why? His voice was low, rough-edged, a sound that belonged to winter nights and distant thunder. Because in 3 days, I'm property. The words tasted like ash, and I'd rather belong to a stranger who expects nothing than a man who'll break me slowly. Something shifted in his expression, recognition maybe, or respect. He tilted his head slightly, and she caught the way 2 men in dark leather straightened at the movement, hands drifting toward weapons. You understand what you're asking, he said. Not a question. I'm buying freedom. You're selling a formality. That's all this is. He stepped closer. Not threatening, deliberate. She could smell leather and smoke and something wild, something that made her hindbrain scream warnings she didn't understand. You have the gold? Naira held up the velvet pouch, heavy, final. He looked at it for a long moment, then at her. His eyes lingered on her face, her throat, the way her fingers trembled despite her steady voice. There's a shrine, he said quietly, east of here. We go now. Relief crashed through her chest. Yes, thank you. You have chosen. His voice dropped, absolute and irrevocable. There is no going back from this. The words settled over her like a brand. Naira's breath caught as understanding crystallized too late. This wasn't negotiation. It was fate, and she'd just sealed it with her own desperation. The shrine crouched in a clearing where moonlight fell like silver through broken stone. Vines strangled what remained of carved pillars. An altar stood at the center, weathered smooth by centuries, marked with symbols Naira didn't recognize, older than her family's crest, older than the treaties that governed marriage contracts. The stranger dismounted first, offering no hand to help her down. She was grateful for it. An old priest emerged from the shadows, robes the color of ash. His eyes swept over Nira, dismissed her, then landed on the man beside her and went wide. My lord, the priest's voice cracked. He dropped into a bow so deep his forehead nearly touched stone. I did not know we were not prepared. No ceremony. The stranger's tone allowed no argument. Bind us. Now. The priest straightened slowly, hands trembling as he reached for a worn leather tome. The old words or the new? The old. Naira's pulse spiked. Old vows were irrevocable. They predated the legal structures that allowed annulments, that let marriages dissolve when convenience faded. She'd researched this, planned for a contract she could escape if needed. Wait! The stranger turned to her, and something in his expression stopped her protest. Not threat, not even warning, just certainty. As if he knew what she needed better than she did. The priest began to chant in a language that tasted of smoke and bone, words that made the air feel heavier, charged. He bound their hands with cord that looked like woven shadow, and Naira felt the magic of it, real, undeniable, crawl up her arm. Speak the accord, the priest instructed. The stranger's voice was steady. I claim this woman as mine. Her debts are void, her contract's ash. Any man who touches her answers to me. Legal armor. Naira understood suddenly. This wasn't about romance. It was about making her untouchable, protected by something stronger than her uncle's bargains. Your words, the priest said to her. Naira swallowed hard. I accept this bond freely. I answer to no claim but this one. The cord tightened. Warmth flooded through her palm where their skin touched. Not desire, but recognition. Like her body remembered something her mind had never learned. Her breath caught. His fingers tensed against hers. The priest cut the cord with a blade that looked older than the shrine itself. It is done. No law supersedes this. No contract holds weight against it. Naira's knees felt weak. She'd meant to buy protection. Instead, she'd bound herself to something she didn't understand. The stranger released her hand carefully, as if she might shatter. "Leave before dawn," he said quietly. "Go north to the river crossing. There's an inn. Tell them you're under my name. They'll shelter you." "What name?" she whispered. "They'll know." He wasn't giving orders. Naira realized that with strange clarity. He was offering safety without demanding presence. Protection, not possession. The difference settled into her chest, like the first full breath after drowning. "Why did you use the old vows?" she needed to understand. Because men like Vows respect only absolute power. His eyes caught moonlight again. "And now you wear mine." A howl split the night, close, too close. The wolves had followed them. Every line of the stranger's body changed. His stillness shattered into something predatory and ancient. His head snapped toward the sound, lips pulling back from teeth that seemed too sharp in the darkness. And Naira understood with cold, creeping certainty. She hadn't married a man. She'd bound herself to something far more dangerous. They rode through forest roads where moonlight barely penetrated, the only sounds their horses' hooves against packed earth, and the distant rhythm of wolves tracking parallel through the trees. He'd given her his cloak without speaking, the weight of it settling over her shoulders like a claim she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. The silence between them felt alive, charged. Every shift of his body in the saddle ahead registered in her awareness. The controlled strength of him, the way he moved with the horse rather than against it, predator graceful and utterly sure. Naira broke first. "You didn't ask my name." "You didn't. I know it." He didn't turn. "Naira Elowen, niece to Garrett Elowen, promised to Lord Valar Hask in exchange for grain stores and trade access to the eastern ports." Her spine went rigid. "How?" "You think desperation makes you invisible." His voice carried through the dark, not unkind. "It doesn't. It makes you obvious." "Then you knew what you were agreeing to. My uncle will come for me. Let him." The casual certainty in those two words made her pulse spike. She urged her horse faster, pulling alongside him. "I paid you for a legal shield, not a war." He looked at her then, really looked, and the intensity of it stole her breath. "You don't understand what you bought." "Then explain it." "No." Something almost like amusement touched his mouth. "You'll see soon enough." A howl rose from the left, answered immediately by two more on the right, closer than before. Naira's horse danced nervously beneath her, whites of its eyes showing. His mount didn't react at all. He made a sound, low, barely audible, that wasn't quite human. The howling stopped. Complete instant silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. "They're not following us," Naira said slowly, understanding creeping cold through her chest. "They're following you." "They're waiting for permission." "Permission for what?" He didn't answer, just kept riding, and the forest seemed to part for him, shadows bending away from his path. She'd heard stories, drunk travelers' tales of alphas so powerful they commanded wolf packs, men who could break other shifters with nothing but will and presence. But those were just stories, warnings to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. Except she'd felt the magic in those vows, watched a priest bow like he'd seen something divine. And now she rode beside a man who commanded apex predators with a sound in his throat. "What are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He reined his horse to a halt, turned in the saddle to face her fully. The moonlight painted him in shades of silver and shadow, made his eyes glow with light that had nothing to do with reflection. Fear and fascination warred in her chest, primal terror and something darker, more dangerous. The part of her that recognized power and wanted to understand it, to touch it, to know what it felt like to stand this close to something that could destroy her without effort. "You stood in a night market," he said quietly. "Desperate enough to sell yourself to a stranger. You chose me over every other man there. Do you know why?" Her throat felt tight. "Because you looked strong enough to protect me." "No." He held her gaze absolute and unshakable. "Because instinct told you I was the only one who could, the only one strong enough that no other power would dare challenge my claim." "I don't understand." "You chose the Alpha King." The words settled over her like ice water. Alpha King. Not just pack leader, not just powerful. The king, the one all others bowed to, the apex of apex predators, the wolf who ruled wolves. And she'd bound herself to him with vows that couldn't be broken. Dawn broke cold and red across the forest road. Naira saw the soldiers before he did, 20 men in her uncle's colours blocking the path ahead, steel gleaming in the early light. Her stomach dropped. Lord Valor Hask sat mounted at their centre, pale eyes fixed on her with the patient hunger of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted. "There she is," Valor's voice carried the false warmth of a host greeting late guests. "My wayward bride. Your uncle has been quite distressed, Naira." She felt the Alpha King go utterly still beside her. Not tense, still, the way avalanches were still in the moment before they fell. "I'm no longer your concern, Lord Valor." Her voice shook but held. "I'm married, legally bound. Your contract is void." Valor laughed, soft, indulgent. The sound men made when women spoke of things they couldn't possibly understand. "Married? To some mercenary you found in the gutter of a night market?" He gestured dismissively at the man beside her. "Your uncle will have it annulled before midday. Come now, don't make this uglier than it needs to be." "The old vows don't annul." Naira lifted her chin. "I know the law." "The law?" Valor's smile thinned. "Sweet girl, the law is whatever men with power say it is, and you've bound yourself to a nameless nobody who—" The Alpha King dismounted. The movement was fluid, unhurried, but something about it made every soldier's hand drift toward their weapons. He walked forward 3 steps, positioning himself between Naira and Valor's men. "My name," he said quietly, "is Calith Dravener." The effect was immediate and devastating. Colour drained from Valor's face. 2 soldiers at the front dropped to their knees without thought, instinct overriding training. Others followed, a wave of submission rippling through armed men like grain bending before wind. "No," Valor's voice cracked. "That's not— You can't be—" "Calith Dravener," the Alpha King repeated, and power rolled off him now undisguised. Alpha King of the Northern Territories, sovereign of the Wolf Courts, and as of last night— His eyes found Naira's, something almost gentle in them. Husband to Naira Elowen. The world tilted. Naira gripped her saddle to keep from swaying. Alpha King. She'd known that, he'd told her, but hearing his full name spoken aloud made it real in a way that hollowed out her chest. She hadn't married protection. She'd married a throne. She didn't know. Valor grasped at the only thread left. She couldn't have consented if she didn't know who. "She knew I had power." Calith's voice cut like a blade through Valor's desperation. "She knew I could protect her. The specifics of my title don't change the nature of her choice." He looked at the kneeling soldiers. Authority without legitimacy is just violence waiting to happen. She chose freely. That makes her choice law. Educational weight settled into the words, the difference between forcing obedience and earning it, between taking power and being given it. Naira felt it in her bones. Calith turned his full attention to Valor. "You will not speak to my wife again. You will not look at her. You will not exist in her awareness." "The contract is ash." Calith took 1 step forward. Just one. Vela's horse shied back. Any man who attempts to enforce it answers to me, personally. The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. This was what real power looked like. Not cruelty, but certainty so complete it didn't need violence to back it. Calith's voice dropped to something deadly soft. Seize Lord Vaelor Hask. 2 soldiers moved forward. Not her uncle's men anymore, but Calith's. They'd shifted allegiance the moment his name left his lips, instinct overriding coin and contract. They hauled Vaelor from his horse with efficiency that held no rage, no satisfaction. Just duty. Vaelor struggled once. Calith looked at him. He went still. Lord Vaelor Hask. Calith's voice carried to every man present. You are stripped of authority over Nira Eloan. Your marriage contract is void. Your claim dissolved. He turned to one of the soldiers. The document. A young guard stepped forward, hands shaking as he produced the rolled parchment. Her uncle's signature in black ink, Vaelor's seal pressed into red wax. The contract that had haunted her for months. Calith took it, held it up so the rising sun illuminated every word. Then he handed it to Nira. She stared at the paper, at the casual cruelty written into legal language, transferred upon agreement of both parties, subject to the authority of Lord Vaelor Hask in matters of residence, conduct, and issue. Subject. Like she was livestock. Burn it, Calith said quietly. Not a command. An offering. Someone passed her a torch. Nira's hands trembled as she touched flame to parchment. It caught immediately, curling and blackening, Vaelor's seal melting into nothing. She watched until ash drifted through her fingers like snow. Safe. For the first time in months, she felt safe. You will return to your holdings, Calith told Vaelor. You will not pursue this matter. You will not speak of it. If I hear you've approached another woman the way you approached this one. He let the sentence hang, unfinished, and more terrifying for it. Vaelor nodded once, jerky and graceless. They released him. He mounted without looking at Nira, without looking at anyone, and rode north with his remaining men trailing behind like whipped dogs. Nira watched them disappear into the tree line, waited for the satisfaction, the triumph, found only exhaustion and something lighter, relief so vast it made her knees weak. Calith dismissed the soldiers with a gesture. They melted into the forest, giving them privacy she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. He stood 3 feet away. Close enough to speak to, far enough that she didn't feel cornered. He hadn't touched her since they'd dismounted, hadn't reached for her, hadn't tried to claim some physical acknowledgement of what had just happened. Power used without cruelty. Protection offered without possession. She'd spent her life around men who took what they wanted and called it their right. Calith had just unmade a lord with 6 words and hadn't laid a hand on anyone. You're safe now. His voice was gentler than she'd heard it. Vaelor won't trouble you again. Neither will your uncle. Because they're afraid of you. Yes. The honesty of it struck her. No false humility, no pretense, just truth. And what should I be? Nira asked, the question raw in her throat. Safe or afraid? Something shifted in his expression. Pain, maybe. Or recognition of pain in her. That's your choice. It's always been your choice. The words settled over her like a cloak she could choose to wear or set aside. Control, she realized, looked like this. Like being given options instead of orders. Like power that waited for permission instead of taking without asking. But fear and safety weren't the only things she felt standing here in dawn light with ash still clinging to her fingers. We need to talk, Nira said. Privately. Now. Calith nodded once. There's a clearing 1/2 mile east. No one will disturb us there. He waited for her to mount first, watched to make sure she was steady in the saddle. Then he followed, the Alpha King, trailing behind his wife because she'd asked him to. The clearing was ringed by ancient oaks, untouched by the chaos of the road behind them. Sunlight filtered through leaves in shattered gold, painting everything in morning's softer palette. Naira dismounted before he could offer help, needing the space, the autonomy of her own movement. She turned on him the moment her boots hit earth. "You lied to me." Caliph went still. Yes. The admission, immediate, undefended, stole some of her anger, but not all of it. I stood in that night market thinking I was buying safety from a mercenary, a sellsword who needed coin. Instead, I bound myself to a king with vows that can't be broken. I know. Do you? Her voice cracked. Do you understand what you took from me? I thought I was making a choice, but you knew. You knew exactly what was happening and you let me walk into it blind. I did. He took one step forward, then stopped, as if crossing some invisible line he'd drawn for himself. I hid who I was intentionally, Naira. Because if you'd known, if you'd understood the weight of my name, your choice would have been corrupted. Corrupted? The word tasted bitter. You mean informed? No, I mean corrupted. His jaw tightened. If I'd told you I was the Alpha King, what would you have felt? Relief? Gratitude? Terror? All of it would have been about my power, not your need. You'd have agreed because saying no to a king is dangerous. Because men with crowns don't take rejection well. Because survival instinct would have overridden everything else. The truth of it hit like cold water. She wanted to argue, to rage against the manipulation. But he was right. If she'd known, if she'd understood, fear would have made the choice for her. I needed you to choose freely, Caliph continued, voice rough. Not because I could protect you, any alpha could do that, but because something in you recognized something in me, and that recognition was yours. Untainted by power or politics or fear. He paused. I needed to know you'd want me even if I was nothing. Naira's breath caught. Want. Not need. Not use. Want. That's still manipulation, she said, but the anger had drained from her voice. Informed consent means knowing what you're agreeing to. All of it. Not just the parts someone decides to show you. You're right. Caliph took a step back. Then another, creating distance, removing the weight of his presence. Which is why I'm releasing you. Her heart stuttered. What? The vows can't be undone by law, but I can choose not to enforce them. His eyes held hers, steady, certain, breaking. You're free, Naira. Walk away. I'll make sure your uncle and Vela never trouble you again. You'll have protection without the bond, safety without the cage. He meant it. She could see it in every line of his body, the way he'd physically removed himself from her space, the careful absence of pressure in his voice. This was what consent looked like. Not just asking once, but continually offering the door, making sure she knew she could leave. And if I don't want to walk away? The question emerged smaller than she'd intended. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, barely restrained. Then you choose again. This time knowing everything. Knowing who I am. What it means to be bound to me. The danger and the politics and the weight of a crown you never asked for. Naira's pulse hammered against her ribs. Fear warred with something else, something that had sparked the moment she'd seen him in the night market, recognition that went deeper than logic. He'd hidden his title, but he hadn't hidden his nature. The control, the predatory grace, the power she'd sensed even when she'd thought him nameless. She'd chosen him then. Not because she'd understood everything, but because her instincts had known what her mind couldn't name. I choose you, Naira said. The words felt like stepping off a cliff, knowing what you are, knowing what it costs. I choose this. Caliph closed his eyes, exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. When he opened them again, something had changed, shifted, deepened. The bond between them flared to life, no longer a thread but a rope, binding them together with force that stole her breath. She felt him in her chest, her bones, the base of her skull. Not intrusion, presence, awareness that she wasn't alone anymore. that she'd never be alone again. The wolf court convened at sunset in a hall carved from living stone, torches casting shadows across faces that watched her with predatory focus. Alphas from every territory, 30 men and women whose power pressed against her skin like heat from a forge. They didn't bow when she entered. They stared. Calith's hand rested at the small of her back, steady but not possessive. Grounding. Naira Elowen Dravenor, he announced, voice carrying to the vaulted ceiling. My wife. Your queen. Silence fell like a blade. An older woman with silver threading through dark hair stepped forward first. She's human. Not accusation. Observation delivered with the weight of a challenge. She is, Naira said before Calith could answer. Every eye snapped to her. I'm human. I didn't grow up in your world. I don't know your customs or your hierarchies, but I made a choice and I stand by it. A choice made in desperation, a male voice called from the back, bought with gold and fear. That doesn't make you queen. Naira's spine straightened. She felt Calith tense beside her, sensed the power coiling in him ready to strike, but she placed her hand over his. Wait. You're right, she said. Desperation brought me to him, but I didn't buy a throne, I bought freedom. And when I learned what he was, when he offered to release me, I chose again. Freely. Knowing. She looked at each of them in turn. A title doesn't make someone a leader, neither does force. What makes a leader is the willingness of people to follow, not because they must, but because they choose to. The silver-haired woman's expression shifted. Not approval yet, but consideration. Pretty words for someone who's never led. Then teach me. Naira held her gaze. I'm not asking you to kneel because I married your king. I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn what I've been given. Silence again, but different this time. Thoughtful. Uncertain. She'd given them something they hadn't expected. Honesty instead of arrogance. Vulnerability instead of false strength. Calith's hand slid from her back. She turned to find him watching her with something that looked like awe. The older woman inclined her head. Just slightly. We'll see, little queen. We'll see. The hall emptied slowly, alphas departing in 2s and 3s, their suspicion not erased but softened. Naira felt the weight of their attention lift, leaving her shaking with adrenaline and relief. When the last one left, Calith moved, not away, toward. He sank to one knee before her, head bowed and her breath stopped in her chest. Calith, you don't understand. His voice was rough. For 3 centuries I've ruled through power, through dominance that allowed no question, no challenge, and you just showed them something I couldn't. He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. Leadership rooted in consent, in earning rather than taking. You showed them what a queen looks like. Naira reached down, fingers trembling as she touched his face. Stand up, please. He rose slowly, and the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and dangerous and utterly necessary, made her knees weak. I don't know how to be this, she whispered. I don't know what kind of queen they need. Neither did I when I first took the crown. His hand found hers, their bond humming between them. But you have time, and you have me, and you have the strength that brought you to a night market with nothing but desperation and gold. Time. The word settled over her like a promise and a question. She'd spent her life being told who she should be, obedient niece, dutiful wife, commodity to be traded. Now she stood in a hall of wolves, bound to a king, wearing a title she'd never imagined. And she had to decide who she would become. Not the queen they expected. Not the woman her uncle had tried to make her. Someone new. Someone chosen. The question burned in her chest. What kind of queen would she be? 3 months had passed since Naira Elowen fastened an emerald collar around her throat and counted down the nights until she belonged to someone else. She remembered that woman, terrified, desperate, believing survival meant endurance, and nothing more. She'd been wrong about so many things. Naira stood on the balcony overlooking the northern territories, watching wolves move through the forest below like silver shadows. Behind her, the court gathered for evening council, alphas who no longer watched her with suspicion, but with something closer to respect. She'd earned it piece by piece, mediating disputes with clarity instead of force, asking questions that cut through pride to truth, standing firm when challenged and yielding when wisdom demanded it. She hadn't escaped her fate that night in the market. She'd claimed it. "You're thinking too loud," Calith's voice came from the doorway, warm with amusement. He crossed to her, no ceremony in the movement, just the ease of a man coming home. "The council's waiting. Let them wait." She turned to face him, this king who'd hidden his crown to let her choose freely. I was remembering. The night market. How small I felt. How powerless. Her hand found his, their bond a steady pulse between them. "I thought I was buying protection, purchasing safety with gold and desperation. And now?" His thumb traced circles against her palm. "Now I understand what really happened." Naira looked up at him. Not king and subject, not even husband and wife, but equals bound by choice renewed every day. "I didn't buy anything. I claimed what was mine, my freedom, my future, my right to choose who I became." Calith's eyes gleamed with pride and something fiercer. "You terrified me that night. Standing there with your velvet pouch and your absolute certainty, asking a stranger to marry you like you were negotiating for grain. I was desperate. You were magnificent." He cupped her face with both hands, touch reverent. "You looked at me, at what I am beneath the crown, and you chose anyway. Twice. That's not desperation, that's courage. Or madness. Perhaps both." His smile was soft, genuine, the expression he wore only for her. "But it changed everything. You changed everything." The wolves howled in the distance, their calls echoing through the valley. Inside, the council waited. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, territories to manage, disputes to settle, the endless work of building something better than what had come before. But tonight, Naira stood on a balcony with a king who knelt for her in private, who'd given her power instead of taking it, who waited for her permission before crossing thresholds she hadn't invited him through. She'd walked into a night market 3 months ago believing she would buy her way out of one cage and into another. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't known to look for. A partner who understood that love without choice was just another form of slavery, that protection without agency was still a prison. Naira hadn't paid for a husband that night. She'd chosen her fate, and the Alpha King had followed. If this story resonated with you, if you believe love should be built on choice, respect, and unwavering consent, then hit that subscribe button. Because every story I create explores what healthy love really looks like. Powerful, protective, and rooted in mutual respect. This channel is for anyone who's ever felt powerless and decided to reclaim their story. I'll see you in the next one.